as today movies are a staple in our culture, and in a way, some use martial arts as an action sequence. And me being in a digital media production major, I would like to incorporate this in my future films. But it wasn't always like this. Action movies back then relied heavily on explosions, guns, etc. But that all changed when Bruce Lee entered the scene. As you know, Bruce Lee is a famous actor, philosopher, and martial artist. But how did he become the man that we all know him as today? And how did he change the world? Bruce Lee changed the action movie genre through his martial arts, and this is how he challenged Hollywood's action films at the time, hence the title. First, I'm going to explain Bruce Lee's origins, his fighting techniques, and his entrance to the film industry, and end it with his generational impact in the world. Next slide. All right. First, Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco in 1940. When he was 3 months old, he and his family stayed in Hong Kong. It was here when he was introduced to Master Yip Man. Yes, that Master Yip Man portrayed by Donnie Yen in the Yip Man films. For 5 years, Bruce was taught Wing Chun. Wing Chun is basically a southern style, and it relies heavily on quick movements with arms and legs. And Lee revered his master, and in the Yip Man films, we get to see glimpses of them together. Hence that picture. In high school, Bruce won against an English student in an international boxing championship. He was also a fantastic dancer and a child actor. By the time he was 18, he appeared in 20 films. In 1959, he went back to the US and enrolled and went into the University of Washington, in that picture on the top, majoring in philosophy. While in college, he supported himself by teaching Kung Fu. He met his wife, Linda, and they married in 1964, and they moved to Oakland, where Bruce opened up his second school. The turning point in Bruce's life and career happened in 1964. One day, he was challenged by some men from San Francisco, and Bruce pinned his opponent to the floor very quickly. At this moment, Bruce explored in his martial arts, and eventually this led him to inventing Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. As fate would have it, Bruce was invited to an international karate tournament in August to give a demonstration. And in 1965, he decides to pursue acting after a choice between expanding his Kung Fu schools. Between 1967 and 1971, this saw Bruce land a few roles on TV and film like The Green Hornet, seen on the top right corner right there. While visiting Hong Kong in 1970, Hong Kong producer Raymond Chow contacted Bruce to do 2 films for Gordon Hargis. First was The Big Boss, also known as Fists of Fury, and The Chinese Connection, also known as Fist of Fury. Kind of confusing, but I was able to watch those films and I highly recommend them. After the success of those films, he partnered up with Raymond Chow and created Way of the Dragon, with the famous scene being Chuck Norris versus Bruce Lee in the Coliseum. From the article, How Bruce Lee's The Big Boss Shot Kung Fu to the Top, launched one of his trademark moves and stood up for Chinese people with a really long title. His strategy was to heighten the reality of the Kung Fu techniques and an offsetting effect combining the conventions of wuxia pictures. Comparing this to explosions and shootouts from Hollywood, according to Rob Cohen, so you inevitably go to a kind of action which is violent, but not repulsive. And it's innately heroic. It's hand to hand, and it's very up close and personal. And that was from an article called Kickin' Butt, 20 years after Bruce Lee, a martial arts boom. And Bruce Lee's generational impact is the last one. After the success of Lee's films, Hollywood was finally recognizing Bruce as an actor and even perhaps as a martial artist. Because back then, Asians had their limits with Hollywood and getting their walk of fame. And that's something that I could kind of relate to. Undoubtedly, Bruce's film, one of his famous films of all time, is Enter the Dragon, which was a co-production between Hong Kong and Hollywood. When it premiered at the Chinese Theater in August of 1973, it instantly blew up and became a box office success. but Bruce would never see that moment because he died, and his last film was Game of Death. After his films, Hollywood's action genre was never the same since. According to Louis Beale, in video stores, martial arts, ninja, and kickboxer films continue to rent and sell on a regular basis. And Min Lee recalls a quote from Won King Kyung. His maneuvers, his screams, the whole package taken together makes him unique among movie stars. Bruce's career to challenge Hollywood action movie standards respectfully gave him his star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. And yes, that is a picture of me for a little preview of the Tournament of Death that I'm making. So in conclusion, because of Bruce Lee's influence on the action genre, because of the use of martial arts, Hollywood movies and beyond have never been the same since. Through Bruce's origins, his martial arts, he went on the film industry and has changed the world. Although he has passed, the legend lives on through the action genre. He used martial arts to tackle Hollywood's action movies, and Bruce's appearance is the reason. As you watch action movies, or movies with a little action, you might see how martial arts might have had an influence. And just because it all started with Bruce Lee, the actor, philosopher, and martial artist. And it is only right that I leave you with this from the dragon himself. He said, empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. Now, you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. And if you guys ever want to see the Bruce Lee statue, either go to San Francisco or Hong Kong. Thank you.